and welcome to a very special episode of Dungeoneered. I'm Aaron.
And I'm Josh.
Let's do it.
Why is this a special episode, Aaron? What's the What's the big deal?
As I think we all have been counting down the numbers for, it leads up with a good joke. Okay? Why is 6 afraid of 7?
I have no idea. I've never heard this joke a million times.
Yeah, because it's a song, yeah. Hey, imagine if there was a song about this joke. It'd be pretty dumb.
Yeah, it would.
Just like this intro has been pretty dumb.
Yeah.
But it is because it's the best number in the world, as everyone knows. And if you frequented Reddit at all, at any point, you know that this episode would be the best and most special number episode of all time, which is, of course, episode 69.
Okay, there we go.
Nice.
That was a super long way to get there.
Hey, it's just... I was going to say we're in the mood, but that sounded really weird in the context of the episode.
Yeah.
Speaking of cool things, guess what I have on my desk?
Oh, what you got on your desk?
So, you know how for Christmas you gave me a present a very, 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 very long time ago?
Mm-hmm.
And I have just now finally set it up because I was out of USB space on my computer from all the things that I have plugged in.
Mm-hmm.
And I finally got one of those, I don't know, those things that have like multiple USBs that you can like plug into the wall and plug into your computer, and it like extends the like how many USB ports you have.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought one of those, and now I have plugged in our cool Dungeoneered thing that you made, and it lights up and it looks all fancy.
Yeah, it's a laser cut plastic of our symbol.
Yeah, with like a light on the background, and it like lights up all nice. So now I'm like an official podcaster.
Official streamer over here, kids.
Yeah.
Official streamer.
Isn't that what's required for like an official podcast? Is you have like something cool on your desk that like glows and looks cool?
I think that's more of like a Twitch streamer requirement, but yeah, I think it would work for.
True. But I don't, I was thinking though today too, this is totally off topic, but I was thinking today too that, man, I don't have a very good background for anything cool if I ever wanted to do anything like, how everybody always has like books and like, little trinkets? I got nothing. I got closet doors. My room's boring.
Yeah, I'm going to move.
Oh, and a bird
And
cage.
that's literally something I'm thinking about as I'm moving is, okay, I got to set it up in such a way that it's an interesting background for if I want to show my face on any sort of thing.
I've got literally white closet doors. Oh, I've got but I do have a huge bird cage, but that's kind of boring too because she's never in it. So there's nothing really to... I mean, if I did do anything cool, I could have a bird cam, which would be pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
Because, my bird is very entertaining as she's climbing into my dresser right now to disappear into the void. She has her own extra dimensional space in there, which would be something really fun. Well, I guess that's like... I was going to say that'd be something really fun for D&D, except for that's just like Narnia.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd just be copying Narnia. But we should probably get on to the lukewarm open topic now that it's been forever. I was thinking, since we've been having this theme of, kind of diving into how we create things. We did characters. We've done, I wanted to dive into how we create monsters. Because monsters is a huge part of D&D. And I know a lot of people, including myself, will take and, like, reskin monsters. But I'm more talking about, like, creating a monster from scratch. How do you kind of dive in and create a monster from scratch? Custom abilities, things like that. What do you normally do? Because I know it can be really difficult.
Well, I always start with a picture.
So
I'm
I think
okay,
we've talked a little bit about this on the podcast before, but where do you like to get your pictures from?
Pinterest. I think there's just so many wonderful creatives that post their content on there. And I love to just be inspired by, oh man, that's a weird looking monster, or oh, that's crazy.
And I remember you telling me about it, and I was like, nah, that can't be good, right? and finally, for this campaign that we started, I don't know, forever ago, I decided, hey, I'm going to look up some stuff on Pinterest. And let me tell you, man, it's some good inspirational stuff, dude. It's like, really...
If you're looking for ideas on anything, literally anything.
Oh, well, I have
from what
cities,
a city looks like, to what a god looks like, to just a random monster, to a villager or an interesting NPC for them to find. All of that is on there.
No,
It's so cool.
it's crazy. Like I was saying, I have like literal like all throughout the Eversong coast, which is the place that the campaign's in. I have like pictures of each individual cities, you know, and what their districts look like, and then I have pictures of like the landscape in between those and what the landscape of the Eversong coast looks like, and then I have, you know, like people and what they look like, you know, nights, and you know, it's really really awesome, and I'm really enjoying it. And I remember I was not a believer when you first told me about it.
Yeah, every campaign I make, every world I make, I create a Pinterest board for. And I go and I have each nation have their own like little subcategory in that board. And in those subcategories, it's like pictures of like what do I imagine the city and the environment that it's in, like the nation and the environment it's in look like. Like what does the terrain inside of this nation look like? And so if I'm ever like trying to think of descriptions and whatnot, or the players are just going there, I just kind of have this board up, and so when I'm trying to create what they see as they travel and whatnot, I can just describe some of these beautiful pictures that I have here, or use them for inspiration for what kind of is the environment look like.
No, yeah. So highly recommend anyone who's doing any kind of world building to check out Pinterest, because it really really helps a lot. I've tried a little bit with Reddit, but I've never been able to find anything cool on Reddit. But I'm assuming it's probably because I'm not in the right places.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, a lot of the stuff that's cool on Reddit is already on Pinterest.
Yeah, I bet it is. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah, like if I see an interesting drawing or anything on there, the person is most likely already added it to Pinterest first.
Yeah, no, I like I said, I haven't found anything that's like different than what I found on Pinterest. So I think it's kind of like a, you know, they post to both. But anyways, so you start with like a picture of a monster, and so what like so. Are you more the type that's like you just see a picture and then you like want to add it into your world, or do you think like, hey, this is kind of the concept I'm going with my campaign, and then you look for pictures around that?
I think it's a little bit of both. I'm never like, if I see something and I'm like, that's incredibly cool and it would make sense with what's going on in the story, then I'll throw it in. But I don't. I like to say, hey, I'm thinking of a monster like this. I want to see if there's any images out there that are sort of like that.
Yeah, because I know so in my campaign currently, I've gotten the main group that you guys are currently dealing with. They started as an inspiration from Pinterest, just from a picture. But I had a basic idea of what I wanted to do with like the main group that you guys are dealing with right now. But like, well, I mean, there's several, but so that's kind of how I did it. But I had this like basic idea where I kind of formed like a, you know, what kind of concept do I want my campaign to be? Do I want it to be, you know, thriller? Do I want it to be horror? Do I want it to be like adventure? Do I want it to be political? You know, what do I want? And then from there, so if I was like, you know, I want my campaign to be political, then I start thinking of, well, like what monsters would be good in a political campaign setting. And obviously you have things like Rock Sasha, things that can like, you know, turn themselves into different people and creatures and stuff like that. But then when you start diving into like, you know, monsters and, you know, what kind of things people use to fight different wars and different, you know, use in different situations, then you can start diving in with those. I'm also, like I've said 100 times, a huge fan of horror. And so like, I just love to like think about like what would be intense and scary for a party to go through. So once you have like a basic understanding of what your monster is going to look like, we need to talk about abilities and stats and health and things like that, because that is like the hardest part. That's the hardest part.
Yeah. So what I do is I pull up a stat block that is in the range that I want. So this stat block is CR 12. That's what I'm looking to do. So I kind of keep. Also, if you look at the DM screen has a whole bunch of stuff on what should a monster of that level, like what is deadly for characters, what is not deadly. They have this list on the back of them, and it's like this much damage in a turn is like gonna kill them. This is don't do this much damage ever, and it has kind of guidelines
like
to be
4d10 or whatever is deadly to blah 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 level, and you know, like that kind of thing. Isn't that what
I don't know this. Like? I don't remember the specifics, so I can't.
I haven't even used it, I don't think, ever.
But so once I have that stat block that is in the range that I want, I try to build something similar to it, like keep around the same damage levels, but allow the things to change of like, oh, maybe it also has reach, maybe it has, and just like kind of changing it based on the image. Like, oh, this one has claws, so it's probably going to do extra damage with its claw attack, or so on and so on.
So here's my question then. How often do you make a monster from scratch versus how much do you just like reskin abilities? Like, do you most of the time just reskin abilities to match a creature, or do you ever like make something up completely new that you don't think is ever in D&D, that you don't know of in D&D?
I think the majority of the time, I will take bits and pieces, but I think I think bits and pieces of like, oh, I like this weird ability, and it would make sense for my little monster to have it. So instead of creating a whole new stat block, I just say it's this stat block, but it also has Vicious Defender or Relentless Endurance, or like it has this other ability.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I don't know. I do a pretty heavy mix of both, but it's, there's only so much you can do when it's like roll 4d6 damage, like there's only so much you can do with different abilities, but I try to do a little mix of both for a couple reasons. One, and you don't have to worry about this part as much if you're new to the game, but a lot of players, especially when their name starts with J and ends with sh, know a lot about different monsters and different abilities and different stat blocks. So when you just like steal from those monsters' abilities or use the same kind of monster, then you have people who are like, oh, I know what this monster is and I know what their weakness is.
Yeah.
Where when you make something
that's why I try to, because I know that is a irritation I cause as a player, because I know this.
Yeah,
and
it's
so
not even so
to...
much. It's just like it's just like it's really hard as anyone to like not subconsciously, like if you know what the monster, like a zombie for example, a zombie has a Constitution save to survive. The DC equals damage. That there's an ability there, but if you use radiant damage or hit a critical, it dies no matter what. So it's like really hard as someone to just like subconsciously not think about that,
Yeah. So I always try to think about, okay, I have to limit this based on what my character should know, and I try to limit it. I know sometimes I don't do it perfectly.
Oh yeah, and again, it's not like a big gripe or complaint or anything, but it's just like it's really hard as a player who knows, who's DM'd or knows a bunch of stuff about all the different monsters and is, watches Critical Role and different D&D shows. Like you get exposed to a lot of these same monsters, so it's like interesting when you make a new ability, and they don't know what it does or what it is, because it just like kind of adds a little bit of flavor to the game. But you have to be really careful because they can feel really overpowered, or they can feel really like specifically targeted against someone. And that's something too that I wanted to discuss in this, is how do you like specifically prevent your players feeling like they're like targeted by a certain monster ability? And you get what I'm saying? Like I have a character who has really high con but really low wisdom, but all of a sudden this monster just starts using wisdom saving throws against me type deal.
Yeah.
Do you know, like, is there any way that you kind of try to avoid? Do you try to avoid that kind of feeling? I mean, I guess it depends on the monster, because there are certain
there's times where that feeling is it adds justified to the story. Yeah.
Because I always think about like, well, if there's like a story that forms around a character who turns invisible and steals stuff, over time there might be someone like a wizard or something who develops a trap or a way to uncover or see that invisible creature, or like
I mean, so I have had like creatures kind of I don't like it to just steal. I don't like stealing things from the players. I don't like just, hey, this thing is gone all of a sudden. I think it's interesting, but it's quick to feel like it's overused. So I have done at one point instead of stealing something, breaking a potion that one of the players had. So when they reach into their bag, they find this potion is broken. So they were fighting a bunch of these decapitated hands. These like they were just cut off hands.
Those are monsters in the D&D monster manual, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know they are.
1/8 or whatever.
I just forgot what they were called. I don't remember what they're called, but
yeah.
But so they were fighting zombies, and there were a few of these hands. One of them rolled really well on its stealth and was able to stealth up into the bag of one of the players. It tried to steal something, but it broke it. It broke the bottle in the end, and the shards of glass actually did enough damage to kill it. So it just died trying to steal this vial, and they reached their hand in their bag, and they found this zombie hand that died, and it's in their bag.
That's pretty funny. That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, it was they were like, wait, what happened? And they could like figure out that, oh, there's all these glass shards in it, and there's all this liquid all in my bag now.
Why were you getting rid of the potion? It just didn't want them to have it?
It was literally just what the leader of that group would want them to do. What it would have told. They kept using these potions to heal, and they were like, okay, well, if we're gonna fight them, we want to limit how many of those they actually have. So let's try and get to them. The other ones were terrible on their stealth, so it just started a combat. But this one rolled incredibly well on its stealth and was able to slip through.
Interesting. See, because that's kind of like an example where I think like countering, what players are doing is like a justified, like if you have an intelligent bad guy who, who knows what's going on and knows a little bit about the party and what they use, I think it's justified for him to find some sort of counter or, like a way for him to, see the person who's invisible, get past somebody's, high armor class but low dex, like...
Yeah, people have the intelligence to be like, hey, I've tried to attack this guy 20 times. None of them have hit. He clearly has too high of armor class for me. I'm just going to make him start making saves.
Right, like he's clearly a better sword fighter than me, clearly
Yeah, I'm not getting through his guard.
So yes. I'm just going to, blow him up and see if he can jump out of the way, Like, yeah. Those are good things. It's just you have to be really careful when you're making a monster that your party doesn't feel specifically targeted. That you're just like everything they do is you have a counter for, like, oh, sorry, my monster has incredibly high, intelligence to avoid that spell you love to use.
I make sure every monster I use, like, I'm not transferring over their knowledge. So it's not like, hey, you fought this lich learned you do this all the time, so it created a counter for it. And then the next person you fight, oh, they have that counter too. It's like that next enemy, the next big bad, they have to figure out that for themselves. So they start from a 0 position and have to learn those things.
Right. No, totally. And then same with like, I know a lot of people too when they're playing like a character and they're fighting against somebody with like really high armor class, because that can also be like a counter to like a paladin, for example. Paladin will run in there and try to go hit somebody, but he just can't hit him, and therefore he's pretty much useless. And you have to be really careful with AC and stuff like that as well, because people can really feel like this is really dumb and this is just like we're never gonna win type
thing. But also sometimes that's what you're going for, which I think is the biggest thing to know about like D&D and just any RPG like this is, I think the majority of times the answer for what you can do is yes, unless otherwise stated.
Totally. No, so absolutely.
There are times for these things that people would be like, no, don't ever do that. There are times when that is required, and like with the with the just high AC, sometimes you're trying to scare your players. You want them to run. The majority of time, they will not run unless you say, oh, you rolled a 24 to hit? No, that doesn't hit. And then they're like, everybody's like, what? Crap. We gotta run. This thing has a 25 armor class. We are never, ever gonna kill this thing. We gotta go.
Right, but then that also can it can also make somebody else feel like the hero of the spotlight too, though, which is really fun too. Like the wizard's all of a sudden really, really good because he can actually, blow him up without having to hit his AC. So
Yes.
it is also about letting other people shine in the moment because the paladin's always like I go in, I do 70 points of damage, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah, that would be an interesting way to get to deal with like crit fishers.
No,
Like,
totally.
give this creature a really high AC. So yes, you're rolling, but you have to roll incredibly well to even hit.
You literally have to roll a crit to hit.
Yeah, pretty much. But the people who are forcing them to make saves, like the wizards and stuff, they're hitting all the time because they just need them to make saves.
No, right. And I know we're kind of getting a little bit long, but what I also wanted to discuss with this in monsters is like layer and layer actions and like how you incorporate those with monsters as well. Because I know that's something too that can be kind of fun. It can be super fun for a DM to have fun layer actions. But also something where people are like, what do I do? Do I just make, a vine attack you out of the wall? Like that type of thing.
That's another thing where I go to stat blocks for help. Just like see what they have. And also I think about the environment. So, hey, you're underground. One of the things you should be able to make stalagmites or stalactites. Stalagmites are on the ground, so stalactites fall from the ceiling. And like you should be able to use the environment you're in. Oh, you're facing a fire dragon in a volcano. He's gonna pick up some of that lava and chuck it at you because it doesn't hurt him. It's gonna hurt you.
Right, or like you're underwater in like an underwater cave, and the seaweed is actually able to be controlled by the monster, and it can like grab onto you and tangle you up.
Yeah,
that kind of stuff. You just always how I always do
like
it
a necromancer. If you're fighting a necromancer, have undead bodies literally chained to the wall where like people clearly died there, and have them, if the party gets too close, grab at them or try to like grapple them.
Or even like just corpses in big piles, and they come, they every turn or so, a few of them stand up and start walking down towards the party as zombies. Like you just always want to think about the environment that your monster is. What's the environment it's cultivated? Because depending on the monster, it could purposely done these things. And then how does that activate, and how does the environment around it come to life?
Yeah. Now I think I'm going to cut us off there. We went very long.
We did.
So, because of the special day that it is, the special number, I wanted to have our title be what it was, as you all who clicked this episode saw.
Gosh dang it, we're 5. I swear we're 5 years old.
Yes. Oh, yeah, we kind of are. So it's nice.
So mature.
Nice, because it's episode 69.
Gosh.
So this week was kind of hard on me to try to find the right topic to make sure that the title is nice.
I was
so
actually
this topic will be a little more niche. About this. Yeah, and can often be skipped during world building. But including it kind of really helps make the world feel more realistic. Now, we're going to talk about humor and in-world jokes. I've read quite a few research papers and studies trying to find the best way to talk about this topic. So, what is humor? A study called it an expression of what is interesting or funny that is accompanied by emotional replies and vocal expression, like laughter and smiling. This idea of humor is seen in nearly every culture. However, it is very different from culture to culture based on how they develop, how they were ruled, and how, like, the religion and different other beliefs that grew in that society. And it kind of creates these different flavors of humor in different societies. I remember a world literature class I took in college. The teacher didn't really care about world literature. She cared about Russian literature. So every book that we read for this class was just Russian literature books.
Classic. Classic.
Every book that we read was just from this Russian literature. It was fascinating, and I really liked that we didn't just talk about the books, and we didn't just read the books. We actually looked into the history and the environment that the books were written in and why they were written.
You know what this makes me want to do? And this might be something that we could do for episode 70 or something later, but it would be interesting to make a humorless society, like a society that doesn't understand humor or funny. I mean, we could even do it for this episode, but
Yeah, we could.
that would be very, very interesting, and also partially funny in its own ironic way.
Yeah. The most interesting thing about this literature that I really enjoyed was that it was all being written under a heavy censorship. The writers developed ways of sneaking their slightly rebellious ideas through the censors, and this included their jokes and mocking of governments and other writers' ideas. This shaped the jokes of the time, and some of the ideas proposed and jokes told are still alive today because this heavy censorship twisted and tuned the culture in a unique way. Circumstances like these shape the jokes and humor. One of the broad strokes made by some of the articles that I read is that there is a clear difference between the jokes in the West versus jokes in the East. In the East, they don't hold as positive an attitude toward humor as the West does. They suggest this is evident because Easterners are not likely to use jokes as a coping mechanism like Westerners do.
Oh gosh, that's a punch to the face. God.
They said these ideas needed to be discussed and studied more, but an interesting fact that seems the same between humor in all places that they've studied is it appears that humor is a part of well-being. Being happy seems to be related to how much humor is in your life. But the relationship is different in intensity and actual effect on well-being based on your location and culture.
Interesting. That's so fascinating. I mean, who doesn't, though? I don't know anyone who doesn't use humor as like a coping, mechanism.
I mean, we're also in the West, let's be honest.
I know, totally. It's super interesting.
It's most likely before this, but the first time that we have lots of evidence to suggest that many people in the West were engaging with humor was in ancient Greece. This engagement
the birthplace of the West
continues until today. It even shows in our science. In psychoanalysis, humor has been used in many different ways, from diffusing situations and stress to providing a less scary environment and perspective upon a traditionally scary subject like inner fears. This is contrary to the East, where Confucianism took up, particularly in China, and part of it actually devalued humor. This and other beliefs like Taoism led to conflicting ideas, creating an interesting back and forth between how humor should be treated in the society. I'm going to literally just quote this Chinese psychology study here. Chinese self-actualization denigrates humor while stressing restriction and seriousness. Chinese are reluctant to admit that they are humorous out of fear of jeopardizing their social status. Chinese do not think that humor is a desirable personality trait.
Interesting. And I want to also make caveat that's probably not all Chinese people, but
that's why I said before I said this, I am literally just going to quote this.
Right.
Because that is not me saying that. I don't know if I have no evidence of any of this. I have also met very funny Chinese people, so I have no idea about the actual living in China culture.
Yeah, it's just so interesting. Like the way you grow up and the things you experience definitely influence, your views on humor for sure.
Yeah, it even like as a kid, I was shocked when I first started to discover. I think it's called Sonder. Sonder is the idea that other people have different thoughts than you. Like they have just that idea of like when you hear a noise or have an experience, like it shapes how you think. Like going through an experience shapes how you think. The idea that when you go through something else in the future, you see it as a certain way, but other people see it in completely different light because of the experiences they've had previously. And just like that, when that like finally clicks in people, it's called Sonder, and it's a big moment in child development for sure.
Yeah, interesting.
But like we have this feeling early in life, just like, oh yeah, everybody like has the same humor and the same stuff, but it's so different in other places in the world. It's so crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's even just different amongst us here in the West. Like,
Yes.
there's a lot of people who, depending on how you're raised, don't like, nice humor.
Yeah.
And there's other people who think it's hilarious, and there's other people who think it's super cringy.
Like,
and
that's why there's so many different comedians for every different style, because some people hate certain styles and other people love it.
Yeah, no, totally.
This goes far enough that it was even stated that the Easterners don't associate humor with positivity or creativity. They discovered this by having people from the same city, some with mostly Chinese culture, and people with more interest in Western culture, so they engaged with Western culture despite being in the same in China, having them describe certain humorous people. The Western culture influenced individuals all used more positive terms, like them being having humor was a good thing, while those who were influenced by the Chinese culture didn't. They didn't all like say it was terrible, but they did not. There was not a consensus like there was on the people who.
I wonder what words they used to describe it. Like,
I know
I'd probably
they didn't.
Assume.
They didn't
Like
say exactly what it was. Yeah, it could have been any of those. I was really interested to see, like, hey, what specifically did they say, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah. Just as someone who speaks Japanese and was in that culture a lot, I know a lot of my Japanese friends struggled with their parents thinking that they were always childish if they were being funny, or that, they were always immature if they were being funny.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if that's just my personal experience, and I'm just curious if that has anything to relate to the study.
Mm-hmm. In the West, we have many different uses for humor, from the basics of bringing joy to use as a defense mechanism to fight negative events to deflection. We also use it to draw attention to something that we dislike without straight up hating on it. To really emphasize the way humor is in America, they use the examples of a professor about to teach a lesson. Originally, he would be expected, with just the way our culture is, to open the lecture with some sort of joke.
Yeah. Yep.
In this example, he didn't, and in the end actually made a flub of his words, and the class breaks out laughing. Because
Classic.
Of the culture in America, it is obvious that they're not making fun of the teacher, but just the humor of the situation, and as an expected release of tension to start the class off.
It reminds me of, I don't know, it was like couple sessions ago when I said doo-doo, and everybody just lost it. I hate it. I hate it so much.
I think that was also a similar thing where there was just a lot of tension, and we were dealing with a lot of interesting, complicated stuff, and then all of a sudden you say doo-doo on accident, and we're all like, don't laugh, and then your cousin Chris just breaks out laughing, and we all just can't hold it.
So stupid. I love it.
No, I could dive more into the nitty-gritty. They talked about a lot of like really specific things, but I think all of this kind of makes sense now, just kind of the idea that one culture to another are completely different ideas about what humor is and how it should be in the society. So I think that what we should do in this episode is create our own humor for our world in multiple ways, showing how it can be done. My ideas for way that it can be done are three. I have three ideas. One, we create the joke, and then we build the context behind the joke. So we don't have to have a hard time with figuring out a joke. We just create a joke and then create context for it. I think this is kind of the easiest way to do it in world building, because you can always, like, making the context for a joke is a lot easier than finding something and then finding out how to make it funny. The second idea is joking on something that already exists in a culture that we've built, or something that's like, it's an unspoken thing, or we can even like build onto the culture a bit and then find something funny within it. Or three, we could create a joke on another culture based on how one sees the other as humorous.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. First, when talking about humor in D&D, I definitely think it really most of humor that I have established in D&D comes from players. So like just from playing the game with your friends. You know, like things become funny when you're playing them with your friends, even though you didn't think they were funny in the first place.
Yeah.
Especially things like names, but that has a little bit less to do with it. But one of my favorite ways to create humor in D&D is actually to create a NPC, because I know a lot of like shopkeepers, for example, can be really funny and really hilarious, and they're really fun to make. So that could be another route that we go, is we make like a shopkeeper who has this completely different personality, which again we have to be careful, because one thing that one group finds funny not necessarily can be offensive to another group. So and that was kind of on the third topic you were saying, was how one culture perceives another culture. And my first thought would be some sort of joke that is like slightly offensive to one but not offensive to the other.
Oh no, yeah, funny. That's definitely what I was thinking of. That it would be considered a bad joke in bad taste, but it would also, you know how many in bad taste jokes there are in the our actual world?
Million.
That is a very realistic thing to have, even though it's not fun and it's really distasteful nowadays.
The first thing that came to my mind in our own world that we've already created would be like the gnomes that live in the top of the trees calling like the dwarves like root lickers or something, because like, you know, they find it hilarious because they're up in the top of the trees and they, you know, and then these dwarves are down in the roots, you know, living their lives down there, and so they make fun of them by calling them, you know, a derogatory term. And that is humor to the gnomes, but not humor to the dwarves, which would be very interesting. But yeah, humor is always a very sensitive topic, because you never know what is funny to some, you know, is not at all funny to others. And, you know, so, but I love the idea of trying to make some sort of like cultural joke and figuring out context of how it started. I think would be really, really fun. But that being said, it's a really hard topic to do.
Oh, it's a super hard topic. Unless, like, I never understood how comedians do it. Creating jokes all the time. It's so hard.
It's very difficult. And I think the main thing, if you're doing it in a world building sense, like, you know, what a culture finds funny, what I think we should do would be to create like a speaking of like comedians, create like a theater, and they have like a play that plays off of the exaggerated, like over exaggerating points of their culture. Does that make sense? So like a gnome, for example, let's say in our gnomish culture, gnomes have, you know, fiery hair and, you know, different colored hairs, which is a fun thing that Chris loves to do in his worlds.
Well, that's what Pathfinder does for their gnomes. So it's...
yeah, and so you would have like in this play, the gnomes would have completely over exaggerated, over the top, crazy hair, and so the gnomes watching
you're saying they'd be like anime characters?
Yeah, pretty much. And the gnomes watching it would find it hilarious, because everyone in gnomish culture has, you know, like pink hair, blue hair, purple hair, you know, but when they're just so exaggerated and over the top, it just plays off the fact that we have a funny sense of style.
I mean, also it'd be really funny if in their plays they just made all of the actors have really dull hair.
Yeah, well, that's
like,
another one
they're
too.
brown, or that is how they show other races, because they don't need to make the other person taller. They don't need to make like a gnome taller in their play. They just give them like a really bland wig.
Yeah, exactly. And it would, you know, it adds humor into their culture where they think it's funny, you know, because they're making fun of themselves and they're, you know, they're laughing at themselves.
Yeah.
You know, it's happened a lot in real life, but in the opposite direction of like completely derogatory. Happens all the time with, you know, really hard subjects like things like blackface. You know, so you have to be really, really careful with real life situations, because a lot of humor is built to degrade another group and make fun of another group. But I always find, in at least a little bit in a D&D setting, that when it's their own group making fun of their own, like themselves, and laughing about it themselves and finding it funny themselves, but no other group is like making fun of them or controlling them with it, then I usually find it can be okay. And so I think it'd be really fun to do like a theater where like there's a play that tells the tale of some sort of like folklore that they have, right? But in this play, there's just over exaggerated characteristics of their own race. So like if the gnomes created some sort of tree theater, for example, and all the gnomes in that play have brown hair, like just boring hair, or completely over exaggerated hair, or like the gnomes are all like extra short or extra tall, like they're all on stilts or whatever.
What I was thinking would be funny would be anytime there's somebody of another race that's like supposed to, like, oh, this is a human character. That's when they give them the bland wig. Also, I think they make it the smallest person in the troupe, just because it's really funny to have the human played by the smallest gnome they could.
Oh yeah, that'd be pretty funny.
It's it's all like they understand that's not how it actually is, but they just think that's hilarious.
Yeah, I like the idea of like you have a Goliath character or even like a giant, right? Like there's like for example in the play, like the main characters would be coming upon this giant that they have to defeat, and when the giant steps out, it's the shortest member of the cast, right? Like it's the shortest gnome of the cast,
and they have like this sound effects to make it sound like they're
boom, boom, yeah,
as they move
exactly along. Right. So it kind of reminds me of like in real life, like the Wizard of Oz when you first meet the wizard in the Wizard of Oz. He's like,
don't spoil it.
Yeah, true. Spoilers.
I'm just kidding. It's been
spoilers.
How many years?
A lot. That movie also has some very distasteful things in it, but it's really funny because the wizard comes out and you're expecting like this grand, powerful wizard, and it's like
this grand sorcerer exemplar.
Yes, exactly. But it's not, and so I think like what we would do is if we wanted to play in theater, and I guess we're going with this gnomish society because that's where we're at now. But it starts off with like a gnome in his little like adventuring group, and it's how like a gnome saved the forest or whatever, right? Because the gnomes are all about the forest and keeping the forest. So it's like there's some sort of evil danger that this group of gnomes goes to get rid of to save the forest. And what you would do is all the gnomes either have exaggerated features and hair to make fun of themselves and they think it's funny, and then the main bad guy is some sort of like evil like necromancer or whatever, and he has like a giant under his service, right? So what you want to avoid, and this is again me talking a little bit about sensitivity because you have to with humor, but what you want to avoid is the gnomes think that because he's a giant, he's an enemy, right? So you really want to avoid, because you're big, that means you're bad. So you want to avoid that. So you have say a gnomish necromancer is using his powers to rot and destroy the forest, okay? And these 4 gnomes go out and adventure. They find all sorts of cool, fun things, and they fight a bunch of bad guys. And one of the encounters would be the giant, where there's a big build up to this intense situation where they can hear the giant bellowing and screaming. They can hear the footsteps running, and then when it comes out, it's the smallest gnome. The other one you could try to do, and this one would be a little bit harder, would be to figure out where the humor is between a living and vibrant forest versus like a dead and unhealthy forest. And you could play on that, but I'm not 100% sure how I would do that. Because you could play off the fact that like a healthy forest is like, that one's harder.
Yeah, I don't exactly see what you're going for that one.
So
but,
like what you could do is like the dead forest is like, for example, instead of all the leaves being green, it's just like all the leaves are bright pink or whatever. Like just something completely outlandish where you're expecting something. You're expecting like a dead haunted forest, but instead it's like a hallowed forest where it's like beautiful and bright and like completely the reverse of expectations. So you revert what expectations are, and that can be funny to audiences.
So I like this idea of these gnomes being theatrical.
Yeah.
Do you think really this world of season 4 is theatrical? Do you think there's like a play in every town, and like it's just a theatrical world? I mean, I kind of like that idea.
I would like the world to be like artistic, if that's what you mean by theatrical.
No, I mean literally there's theaters in like every town. The party will get lots of invites to go to them, and it's really just like they don't have to go to any of them, but all of them are just like, hey, this is like, because the way I would use this as a DM is create fun world lore that you enjoyed, but there's no reason for your players to know it.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
And you could just create a play about it. And if they really are like, oh man, I want to learn as much lore as possible, like we are in your world, Aaron.
Yeah. Oh boy.
I've already done a play in one of my campaigns, and I had 2 of the players went and saw it, and it was really interesting. And I honestly would not be would be happy to do another one. And
Yeah,
I
I've
think
done
the
a
best
play
way
too,
to
and
do
they're
it
really
is
fun.
just give them some exposition lore that you would always love to give them, but there's no reason for them to know.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of do we want our world to be theatrical, again,
And I think we can
in
also
real life,
dive into,
it varies so much on culture, you know?
Yeah. Well, no, I definitely think there's some that wouldn't be, but I think I mean, there also might be a reason why people in this world are.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more fun to focus on like the arts aspect instead of just like, you know, a single expression of the arts. So I think like I would love to have a world that's very vibrant in the arts. So, you know, like I love the idea of these gnomes being theatrical, right? And they have plays and these grand amphitheaters that are like tangled in all of these, you know, in the canopy, and they have these, you know, vast, you know, stadiums essentially devoted to up in the canopies, devoted to these fun theatrical plays. And, you know, they make fun of themselves. But I think with it, there's a little bit of downside where I think the gnomes, again, they can make fun of other races for, you know, not living in the trees, like the dwarves, for example. And so I think they have this like little bit of not high and mighty. I mean, maybe a little bit high and mighty because they live up in the trees. So that's also a little bit of fun inside joke and humor where everybody else, like the dwarves, could call them like high and mighty, like they're, you know, like because they live up high. They, you know, they.
Oh no, I got the joke.
No, I know, but
yeah.
So I think that could be fun too. But you know, again, you have to be really careful, and you have to know your group because, again, and we express this a lot. There are groups that just want to play D&D and not have to have any weird political stuff in it. You know, they just want to go into a dungeon, kill a monster, get loot, go back, get cooler stuff, and repeat. And they don't want to deal with...
A lot of times those people are happy to do it in a unique and fun world. Like they love that aspect, but they don't want to learn any more about that world.
Yeah, and it depends on a person's walk of life. You know, if a person grew up with a lot of, you know, discrimination or, you know, things against them, that it can be really hard for them to step out of that and, you know, experience fun in a D&D world that has discrimination in it. And so you have to be super careful with that kind of stuff and know your players. So
yeah, that's why I always like to boil all that out in a session 1 of like, what are we okay with?
Yeah, what do we, especially if they're not.
What is the reason why you come to D&D? That's one of the things I always like to ask is like, what do you come here for? What do you get? Why do you find D&D fun?
Right. And you know,
and I make sure that each of those is going to happen in the campaign. That like, if they're not constantly happening, whatever it is that they're interested in, I make sure there is a story arc or more that do that.
No, absolutely. And, you know, I think a lot of players come to be heroes and defeat the problems we have in real life, you know, like things like slavery, things like discrimination, things like, you know, a political system that's bad, you know, that's, you know, that's ruled by some sort of dictator and they want to overthrow it. And
one of the things I love about D&D is feeling like in a way that we can't in our regular daily world, like actually being able to influence those in a meaningful, direct way.
Yeah, in an extreme, tangible, like a very extreme way. Like you can literally, you know, in real life, I mean, you still could in real life, but it's much harder to, you know, form a rebellion or whatever.
And it's not going to be, it's not going to feel like a real tangible way. It's going to be like one of those, oh, I donated a bunch of money, or I donated a bunch of my time, and yeah, it helped like 2 people, like physically, personally. But like, it's harder to see the return on your investment for those things, even though they're really good and really helpful to do for sure.
Yeah, and you know, those things can be solved in real life. We've seen it happen a lot in history, but it's just, it always feels like, especially nowadays, where it's like, you know, you go to the polls and you vote for whatever, and you know, and, you know, it's like, well, I just casted a vote, but like, do I feel like anything's going to change? You know, I don't really. But in D&D, the four of you can go and conquer entire kingdoms and change an entire kingdom in its outlook,
Yeah.
because it's a fun story, and that's just a really, really fun part of D&D for me anyways. I love that aspect.
Exactly. And so we
And so
like
when
to
I
go to
have-
D&D to see those horrible things and change them.
Right.
And be
that's
able
why-
to do that. And so those things need to exist in the world for us to go in and be like, no, 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 no. This is never happening again.
Right,
We're
and
taking
that's
you
why
down.
I have those real world things in D&D. Like right now, you guys are dealing a lot with aspects of slavery, and slavery is terrible. And you guys have
And we're
actively
having a
been
lot of horrible
solving
moments
it.
of. I mean, we also have a lot of horrible moments where we're like, we literally can't do anything about this because you are like, the person we're against is like such a higher level than us, and all these horrible moments where we just have to, our characters just have to watch it.
Yep.
Are building to our characters having a further hatred for this and being like, we're gonna take you down. It's coming.
Exactly.
We
Like
just-
we're gonna solve it, but it's just gonna take a little bit
And
of
it
time.
hurts until we get there, but once it happens, it's gonna feel so much better because we had these horrible moments where we just had to watch you be horrible.
Yeah. Right. And so again, with us being online and on the internet, not a ton. Obviously, our audience isn't giant or anything, but
Yeah,
a lot of people can get yet we'll be famous. No, but it's just there's always a reason, at least in my worlds and in D&D, there's always a reason why I create things the way they do. It's not because I am a terrible person and believe these things, but it's because I want to give something for my players to either solve or like conquer and have victory over, which I think is really, really fun and really powerful in a lot of people's lives, especially with, and that's one of the reasons why I like horror so much in D&D too, is because like conquering over those fears that people have in their mind can be really fun and really powerful. And a lot of it relates to humor. And when we first were discussing humor, I always just thought of humor in D&D as just your friends having inside fun jokes that come up at the table, because somebody mispronounced something, which happens all the time, which are really, really fun, or like when in our game, when the word professional comes up, we have an inside joke that we always have, and at this point it's not even like hilarious or anything, but it's just now just like a inside
It
joke
has to
that we
happen
just
every
always
time.
do. I know, right?
and one of the things that was in a previous game we played, we met a Duke, and the Duke's like, sorry, I have to go and do my Dookie duties, and we're like, sorry, what?
No.
Like it was just because it was in this moment. He didn't even realize what he was saying. Chris was, and he said it, and we just never let it go. It was so funny. Dookie duties.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's a Duke. He's got Dookie duties. I don't know what to tell you.
Exactly. So like there's that kind of fun stuff that happens all the time at the
But
D&D
I mean,
table.
yeah, I like the thing that it's realistic. That's what I like, things that are realistic, that have real life examples you can point to and be like, see, it's here, so it should be in my game. And the thing I like about that is like jokes. Like there are cultures where I forget what they're called. Like what are those like they make sense in one language, but when you translate them, it's like that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I don't remember what those are called, but it happens a lot. Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of those things where it's just a saying or an acronym or whatever, and it makes sense and it's used constantly. But if you actually think about it, you're like, wait, what am I saying there?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, there's a bunch. We actually had a whole entire class in Japanese devoted to Japanese sayings that are like really, really cool and interesting in Japanese, but then when you translate them to English, they just lose all of their like their funny their meaning. Either they're funny or even they're like, deep meaning, because like the words don't play with each other the way that they do in Japanese.
Yeah, as somebody who is Irish, there's a lot of interesting ones when it comes to our language, Gaelic.
Yeah.
There's also some Hebrew ones that are interesting as well.
Yeah, and they just don't, like when they translate, they just don't have, the words just don't have that same flow or that same, meaning where they like touch on each other and they play. That sounded weird, but they play on each other.
Yeah. Oh, I think it's also, there's some funny Yiddish. I'm looking them up now.
Oh, there's a ton. Yeah, there's a lot of them. But anyways, what I was going with for that whole entire rant was like, if you were to create something where the gnomes, call dwarves like, dirt lickers or whatever, you have to be really careful about A, who's at your table, B, if you're doing it over a podcast, who's listening and watching, because it can seem very insensitive.
Yes.
Which I know a lot of podcasts have these problems. Critical Role's a really classic example. They, stuff like that happens to them all the time, where they say something or do something that might seem very insensitive to others, and they had no intention of meaning that. It's just, we all have different experiences, and we're all brought up in different ways, and sometimes those ways either A, show up without you realizing that you're, doing something that someone might seem harmful, that might seem, offensive to somebody. So it's just, you have to be really careful, and then when they do happen, be able to A, explain what happens or what's going on, or B, be able to apologize and move on from it, because they do happen. And again, there aren't at least in our group especially, like, if something happens that seems offensive, I've never meant it to be in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. And I think since we're all friends, we can go to you in a way that is not like we realize, hey, I don't think he meant it in a way that felt bad if something does occur.
No, totally.
Which is always having a environment where that is known, like, hey, I could mess up. If I do, I want you to feel comfortable saying, hey, I was not comfortable with that. I don't like where this is going. Like, I want that's the environment we want we want everybody to come and have fun and enjoy it. And if something is causing that not to happen, we want to make that change.
Yeah. Or, and even certain circumstances where players are uncomfortable, if I notice it, I try to avoid them and go to a different group, like, and it's just, that's the beauty of like group storytelling in a game like D&D is like, you can shift and adapt and change what's going on.
So, do we think we should create any humor for another group right now? Or do we want to continue on this art path and for the rest of this episode just look at what art do we think another group does?
Well, it might be interesting to like figure out like what, like if gnomes are theatrical and they express a lot of things through the art of theater, like what would a dwarf do? Do they have a similar, like do they...
I kind of want the dwarfs to be musical. And so they are...
And they come together and have grand theatrical festivals. Yeah, I love it.
They are the music for the theaters of...
Yeah, and though they make fun of each other and have these like monikers for each other, they actually greatly respect each other, and they come together and they combine their talents.
I think any joke said about one of the others, like by the other one, is never meant in malice. It's always meant in like how you tease your friends.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Totally.
Yeah. Like they do call them root lickers, but it's never meant derogatorily. It's meant in like, ha ha ha, you live on the ground, we live in the trees.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then their plays, they like come together and they have this beautiful, symbiotic relationship with their theater and their music. Yeah. And I think that's really
definitely
actually I think that's pretty beautiful, to be honest.
Me too. I think there's also a few crossovers where a few gnomes want to try to get into music and a few dwarves want to get into theater. But I think it's not as common.
Yeah, no, and I think that's awesome, and I think it fits really well with like the roots crafting that we have for dwarves and their weapons. Like they can grow musical instruments too out of these, instead of just weapons. Like they've, I think that fits their culture really, really well too. And maybe even they help like gnomes grow their theaters up in the trees. Like they help them like grow and expand these huge theaters, and perform these. Awesome.
I want elves to do stone carving. The elves of the desert.
Interesting. And what do you like? Do you see them like what are we talking, like classical dwarf stuff where it's like they make these beautiful architecture like pyramids, like how we had them kind of Egyptian style, like that's kind of how they express it, or statues, or what?
I think it's Egyptian in nature. I'm looking up Egyptian architecture right now.
Yeah, I mean, and I also was thinking of hieroglyphics.
That's what I thought of
cool
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like they carve the walls in beautiful ways.
Have these massive stories.
Yeah, they make like
hieroglyphics.
beautiful stone statues and things like the Sphinx and all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's super, super cool. And obviously, again, you know, these are a little bit fluid, so art is always fluid. So it's just because one
100%.
society likes, you know, to do architecture and make their stuff beautiful doesn't mean that, you know, other societies don't. Or that's the only thing they do in a society. So
Yes, there's a bunch of like people inside the society that do other things. This is
Right.
more looking at it from a very basic overview because we don't want to create
Yes.
all the details for you.
No, right.
That
Exactly.
we want to create an idea with room to play in. So even if everybody took our idea, took this overview, everybody would still have something unique because they would add to it in their own way and change it and make it their own.
Right. Absolutely.
They would have we don't want to create the every little person has this or this.
Yeah.
This is the a graph of what percentage does what art. Like we don't need that level of detail.
No, absolutely. And it's really fun too with a game like D&D is when your players are making their characters, they can come up with stuff like this too, you know, inadvertently or whatever, but you know, either way, you know, I love like when I tell my players like, hey, you know, you can have free reign of this part of the culture if you want. Like if you want to make it so that you're like your character and you as a person know in and out what this culture looks like, then you can help me create this culture.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's where we'll call it, probably.
Yeah. About an hour in, probably.
Yeah. Thank you all for listening to episode 69 of Dungeoneer.
Nice. I hate it. It was a really
We're
good episode,
stupid.
though, actually.
That was interesting. It was interesting. If you're listening to us on any podcasting apps or any other way that has ratings and reviews, please write us a review. Let us know what you think about the show. It really helps the show by showing you're engaging in more ways than just one. If you want to write to us at dungeoneered@hotmail.com. We'd love to hear from you if you're just inspired by something we create, or you want to give us ideas for topics or lukewarm opens, or just want to scream at us. We'd love to hear it. Thank you all for listening. And as I always say, always remember to be the sharpest barrel in the bunch. See you next time.
Bye.